In the meantime, before we get started, I'd love to invite you to maybe introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your organization, and where you're joining us from. Great. In the interest of time, and since we have a wonderful lineup of speakers this morning joining us for this very excited launch, I think we're going to get started and others can join and pop in when they're ready. My name is Sherry Lee Erasmus, and I'm the Global Director of Learning at Accountability Lab. And I've been really honored over the last 18 months to serve as co-chair of the TAP Network Steering Committee. I'm sure that many of you, or all of you are familiar with TAP and TAP's work, but we're a global coalition of civil society organizations working towards SDG 16 and the 2030 agenda. And today we're here for the launch of a really important campaign. We are nearing the halfway mark to 2030. And as such, TAP is launching with its whole membership a campaign putting a sense of urgency on the realization of SDG 16 plus. So as I mentioned already, we have a bunch of wonderful people we're going to get to listen to today. So I'm going to have us dive right in by handing over to John Romano, Director of the TAP Network, to welcome all of us.
Great, thanks very much, Sherry, and thanks to all of you for joining us for the launch of this campaign. As Sherry mentioned, this is really kind of the starting point for us for this campaign. We had launched the website, which we'll put in the chat box here. It's pretty simple to find. It's www.sdg16now.org. So this SDG 16 Now campaign, I mean, really has been the product of many months of consultations with many partners around the world, including from the TAP network. So with many of you up to this point, it's really, I think, a product of I mean, a handful of things. I mean, obviously, as Sherry mentioned, we're at the halfway point to 2030. You know, we know that progress is not on track for SDG 16 plus or the entire 2030 agenda on many fronts. And then also seeing 2023 as a critical moment as well with the upcoming SDG Summit in September of 2023. Where heads of state are expected to come and you know, discuss reinvigorating political will towards the SDGs. So recognizing these two you know, key moments, and then obviously a follow-up from the summit into the Summit of the Future, which will be hosted next year, the World Social Summit in 2025. There are numerous opportunities for us to help us get SDG 16 plus back on track as we approach the 2030 deadline, or the second half of implementation towards 2030. I think, you know, kind of the conversation around the campaign also stemmed from a lot of the discussion with many of our members and also governments over the past several years around you know, the need to, in many ways, sensitize SDG 16 plus to a wider audience. I mean, those of us here in this event, we may know that SDG 16 plus is important. We know that peaceful, just, and inclusive societies underpin the entire 2030 agenda. We know how important these issues are, but to many colleagues, they may not. They may not know about SDG 16 plus. So I think there was quite a significant challenge of a knowledge and awareness gap around SDG 16 plus. So this is also kind of an effort for us to help us sell SDG 16 plus. Why are these issues important? How do we make this real to colleagues so that they also either join the movement or explore ways in which their work can also plug in to work of others that are already taking a leadership role on SDG 16 plus. I think, I'll just very briefly go through some of the campaign objectives. I mean, again, recognizing some of these really distinct challenges around SDG 16 plus. The campaign is really looking around three objectives. One is around a push for commitments. And by commitments, we really mean, we really want governments to come to the SDG Summit in September with concrete commitments to action. So telling us exactly what they're going to do to accelerate progress towards SDG 16 plus in this second half of implementation. It's no longer good enough for us to just allow governments to say, yes, we're committed to the SDGs and SDG 16 plus. I think we need to push governments to be more specific on what they're doing to advance SDG 16 plus at a particular level. So that's the first objective. The second is around mobilizing financing. So kind of complementing those concrete commitments to action obviously needs to be backed up by adequate financing. And this is also, again, something that we've heard year and year from civil society partners is that financing just right now is inadequate. I mean, on all fronts, national, domestic resource mobilization, donor, bilateral funding. I think there's quite a number of challenges as it comes to SDG 16 plus in the entire 2030 agenda. And financing is one of those key challenges that holds progress back on nearly every front. So obviously, again, financing a big priority as well. And then also around the increased recognition of civil society as key players around SDG 16 plus. We may know this particularly as civil society, that civil society in many countries is taking a leadership role, maybe where governments haven't necessarily. So how do we increase the recognition and awareness of civil society as key players and leaders around SDG 16 plus to push governments to also be more ambitious on their end? So there are a number of ways that we'll do that we'll discuss in this event. And again, all of these things are issues and topics, priorities that we've heard, again, year after year from our partners that work particularly at the national level as some of the key challenges that we really need to address going forward. And so just very briefly, I'll touch on the three ways that this campaign will mobilize, advocate, and connect. Three strategies that we'll employ to take a lot of this work forward. So around mobilization, I mean, this is obviously recognizing the need, again, to sensitize SDG 16 plus around our communities. And again, that governments need to mobilize additional commitments and financing. So we'll look to mobilize and share these messages. Advocate, I mean, again, really pushing governments and all stakeholders really to bring more ambition to the SDGs summit and just in general from there. And then the third is around connecting. I think this is a key opportunity for us through a campaign to really connect colleagues working around SDG 16 plus, do a bit of storytelling, do a bit of showcasing the really great positive examples of work that's been done to advance progress, and see how we build upon that. So there's a sharing and learning element to this campaign as well. And the final thing that I'll say, obviously this campaign is civil society led. So thanks to many of you who have volunteered to become part of the kind of mobilization and leadership structure of this campaign up to this point. Again, this is, we really want this to be led collectively, but we're also looking to identify what we're calling champions. So this is colleague or partners from governments, international organizations, multilateral institutions, national human rights institutions, private sector, academia, really identifying who are our key champions outside of civil society, at least. And I'm happy to say that we have a few founding champions on board. We have the government of Denmark. We also have International IDEA, who is here with us today, and the Danish Institute for Human Rights as kind of our founding champions to kick off this campaign with. And we look to also mobilize additional champions going forward from here. So I'll stop there. There's a lot more that you can find on our website, but my colleague Tor will also help in that a bit further as well.
Thank you so much, John. I'm going to jump in, if you'll allow me 10 seconds, Tor, with a little bit of housekeeping that I should have gotten to at the top of the hour. We have interpretation services available today. So if you need translation into French, Spanish, or Arabic, if you look at the bottom tab of your Zoom screen, you will see a little interpretation logo. So please feel free to click on that and select the language for which you need interpretation. Thank you. Tora, over to you.
Hi, Sherry, and lovely to see and hear everyone. My name is Tor Hodenfield. I work in the TAP Secretariat as the Campaigns and Advocacy Coordinator. Lovely to be here with you. I'm going to spend the next few moments discussing and sharing some of the opportunities to engage directly with the campaign. So I've posted the link to the campaign on the chat box, and I'm also going to share my screen right now so you can follow along directly as we do a bit of a tour of the campaign platform. And John, just a thumbs up, you can see my screen. Wonderful. Okay, so if you go to sdg16now.org, this is where you will find yourself. This is our campaign headquarters and platform. So all things you need relative to the campaign can be found here. It covers a lot of information about why this campaign that John discussed a moment ago, why SDG 16, why SDG 16 now, and why this campaign. It also covers, once again, the three key things we're calling for commitments, financing, and civil society recognition. And most importantly, I think for the purposes of this conversation, it provides a number of different entry points for you as civil society, as government, as UN stakeholders to participate in this campaign and take some of these actions forward. And so I'm going to share first what some of these campaigns are, and then take you through other portions of the site. So very briefly, in terms of how you as civil society, government, and other stakeholders can support and be involved in this campaign, we have three opportunities, as John mentioned, for mobilize, advocate, and connect. And these include both national and global activities. So everyone is welcome to participate and support, and it depends on where you think your expertise is and how you would specifically like to leverage the campaign for your purposes, and also to complement the initiatives for the campaign. So I'm going to run through very quickly just a few opportunities that might be of interest, and then I'm going to share how you can engage with them specifically. So very quickly, one of the things we're planning is a global day of action around SDG 16. This will be one day where we will try to marshal and mobilize and gin up support from a host of potential amplifiers to underscore the pressing need to accelerate action on SDG 16. So this will be primarily an online campaign where during one day in September, we will encourage everyone to show their solidarity and support for SDG 16 online and possibly through offline activities. We'll also be hosting, together with our colleagues from GCAP and their partners, we'll be supporting something called an SDG People's Rallies. This is an opportunity to bring in the general public and other interested parties during the high-level week of the SDG Summit and UNGA, where we will be coming together in person, believe it or not, during the outside of the UN in a festival-like fashion, where we'll be sharing information, making public calls to the UN during a rally on the SDGs. We will also be building on that work. The same week, we'll be hosting an SDG 16 plus commitment conference. We'll be taking stock of the commitments made during the high level week and during the SDG summit, and thinking about how we can collectively work together to develop kind of rigorous monitoring mechanisms and support the implementation of those commitments articulated during the actual summit. Two other opportunities under the category of mobilize include joining calls for CSO access and participation in the summit itself. So as we know, it can sometimes be a challenge for CSOs, both in New York, but also outside, to access these conversations. So we'll be campaigning around effective civil society engagement and access. And then we will get to what it means to become an SDG champion in a minute. But a few other activities under Advocate and Connect. We'll have a global petition for all civil society calling for accelerated action on SDG 16. We'll be hosting virtual consultations with UN government stakeholders and civil society on the SDG 16 plus process in the summit. Will also be a kind of key tenet of our campaign, of course, is supporting our national members and partners, specifically to work with their government to encourage them to come to the SDG Summit with very specific commitments. So to that end, we'll be working with our national partners to issue joint letters to our governments, hosting consultations with government and national civil society about what those commitments might look like. And then we'll also have other opportunities to express your support and solidarity for SDG 16 around endorsing the Rome Civil Society Declaration, and then sharing your work and advocacy asks around SDG 16. So we really want to hear from you about what you're doing in your local or global context around SDG 16. So encouraging you to send and include your commitments as civil society and other stakeholders to SDG 16 in advance of the summit, which will be captured on our map here. And then finally, on Connect, we'll be providing lots of ways for civil society to come together, and civil society and other stakeholders to come together to collectively and collaboratively amplify our joint messaging and contribute to the SDG 16 Now process and campaign. So one of the things you can do is complete a global survey evaluating the progress of SDG 16, as we said, make commitments on SDG 16, and we'll also provide additionally lots of opportunities for you to receive information through becoming a member of the Mobilization Advocacy Working Group and joining the campaign for including our newsletter. So lots of ways to receive information, engage through our Connect. The last thing I'm going to do before I hand over to my colleagues is just very quickly go through other key elements of the site, but specifically focusing on how you can engage and what that looks like in practice. So if you do go to the site, there's information on our partners. We have a fantastic advisory committee, a core group of coordination that's also reflected in our campaign. So thank you to all of you for your support. And we have a campaign calendar indicating where you can engage. And to specifically engage in the activities, all you have to do is click Mobilize, Advocate, or Connect, and it will bring you to this page where there's a lot more information on each of the activities I just described. And all you have to do at this juncture is click this button here, which says SDG 16 Now Campaign Activities Interest Form. click this form and just indicate which of the activities you're interested in. So I would encourage everyone on this call to do so, either during this call or afterwards, and I will share the link in just a second. And so that is the one form we're using right now to indicate your interest in any of the activities we've just discussed. And finally, what it means, the different layers of engagement. So we welcome, at the current juncture, 3 different opportunities to be involved in the campaign. One is as a campaign supporter. So this includes endorsing or supporting any of these activities, many of which we just, or all of which we just discussed. This is really around taking some of the actions forward. So if you want to be actively involved at the national or international level in co-designing any of our global events or national events, please do become a campaign supporter. If you'd like to amplify our messaging on social media, amplify the campaign objectives, we encourage you to become an amplifier, where you can really lend your voice to the campaign. And then, as John mentioned, we do encourage non-civil society, particularly, so governments, private sector, intergovernmental bodies, philanthropic actors, and NHRIs to become campaign champions. So this is where you can show your solidarity and support for SDG 16, including supporting any of these articulated activities here. So co-hosting national consultations, public, and of course, most importantly, coming to the SDG Summit with specific commitments around resourcing and action on SDG 16. So we really encourage folks to explore this website, take a look and engage with it. We're really proud of it. We hope you find it helpful. And I'm going to share just now the link to the campaign form to initially express, where you can express your initial interest in any of the activity. John, I hope that was exhaustive enough, but before we hand over to other colleagues, is there anything, John, that you wanted to add in terms of how colleagues might be able to support in this campaign and how we can support their efforts as well?
No, Tor, I think you covered pretty much everything. I think that was great and good work. I think the only thing that I think would be great to highlight as well is that throughout this campaign, as we go along, it'd be great, as Tor mentioned, fill out that form. We'd love to hear from you. We'll obviously be guided by the coordination group and the advisory committee. As we go along, just like with any other campaign, we also hope this will be kind of a living, breathing campaign as well. So if there are other opportunities that you see to engage with, we really want this to be an opportunity for us to plug into the things that you're doing, for you to plug in the things that you're doing into the campaign. Again, we really hope that you'll see this as an opportunity to engage and again, help guide us on where you think this campaign can really provide a value add for the work that you're already doing. So that's the only thing that I'd add. Thanks, Tor.
Great. Thank you so much for that comprehensive overview, Tor, and would encourage you to go and spread the word to your colleagues and other partners who you work with within your networks to think through the ways in which they can support this campaign so that it goes far beyond those of us on this call today. I'm going to hand back over to the TAP Secretariat to lead us in a Mentimeter poll.
Great. Thanks, Sherry. Hillary, can you share your screen? So we're going to do a Menti poll. I'm sure many of you have done this in the past. We really want to hear from all of you now around a couple of questions. Ella, I think that's the second question, but the link for you to provide your inputs into the Menti poll here is in the chat box, but it's also up here on the shared screen. The code, you go to www.menti.com. You can enter the code at the top of the screen. It's 4585184. And again, Ellery has also just linked the link directly here in the chat box. So this first question, where are we now with SDG 16 plus? Actually, we just have one question just for time purposes. So where are we now with SDG 16 plus? And where are some of the key gaps and challenges currently? So this will be, just great to hear from all of you on where you think SDG 16 plus is. Again, we've outlined some of the challenges that the campaign is looking to address. But obviously, part of the campaign is, we're looking for tapping into, different communities, different thematic issues, thematic work, to also identify additional areas for us to get into, to take into account, obviously, going forward. Have a couple of responses. Holding governments accountable for their commitments. Yeah, absolutely. Political commitments, democratic backsliding around the world. Question about time zones. Yeah, apologies for the challenge in timing for meetings like this. Funding, political will, funding. Okay. Great. I think some of these are some of the challenges that we had also already outlined. And again, one of the core aspects of the campaign objectives. Key gap is data to determine accountability. So again, another response around accountability as well. I mean, I think also thinking about the political will and accountability side of things. I mean, I think there are some that we've heard from over the years that feel that the political will just isn't there. So how do we hold governments accountable to the things that they commit to, obviously, but obviously the things that they don't commit to? And again, that's part of the focus of the campaign, to make sure that governments are making more ambitious commitments, that they are transformative, and then that we hold them accountable to those commitments. Renewed commitments, data, impact. Okay, another on funding, localization. Great. In the interest of time, I think we might wrap things up there. But I think one thing going forward, just wanted to say, again, a lot of these messages resonate with the campaign objectives, which I think is encouraging to hear. It's hopefully we did a lot of work to ensure that we were consolidating a lot of the core messages that we were receiving over the years from many of you into those three objectives. But again, I just want to highlight that part of our intention for this campaign is to ensure that we're addressing things as they come as well. So, I mean, in an increasingly volatile world with, many converging crises, especially at the global level, surely there may be other opportunities for us to get into through this campaign. So your active engagement through this campaign is hugely important for that. Again, as I mentioned, for us to be sure we're tapping into the work that you are doing and bringing work into this campaign. So thanks to those of you that have engaged thus far, and thanks in advance to those that will engage from here on out. But Sherry, I'll throw it back to you for the rest of the discussion.
Thanks, John. And thanks everyone for participating in the Menti. I think it's really good and heartening in a way to see that for very many reasons, there's alignment in what we feel are the challenges with SDG 16 and where we find ourselves at the halfway mark. So thanks so much for participating. We're now moving into a segment where we'll be hearing from the TAP Steering Committee, TAP National and Regional Partners, as well as an SDG 16 Now champion. So first, I'd like to hand over to Aurellis Bellerini, Senior United Nations Representative for World Vision, and also a member of the TAP Steering Committee. Aurellis, over to you.
Thank you, Sherry, and thank you, John, and the TAP Network Secretariat for this campaign. So at the onset, I really would like to congratulate the network for this very important SDG 16 Now campaign. It is timely and it is urgent. The need for accelerated action to achieve SDG 16 plus and its corresponding target is really now. John was just referring earlier that we are at halfway point to the 2030 commitment date to deliver on the SDGs. However, there is a significant threat that SDGs will not be achieved. The recent UN Secretary General report confirms with strong evidence this fact when he singles out the number of SDGs that will not be achieved, which is almost over half of the SDGs. So this campaign clearly is very important, particularly the 3 priorities that lays out, which can truly bring us back on track. We at World Vision and as part of the steering committee, we believe this campaign will certainly contribute to re-energizing a momentum around SDG 16 plus. And it can also set the stage for the HLPF review of this SDG in 2024. As you know, that's going to be one of the SDGs under review next year. As a child-focused organization, World Vision has a focus on the ending violence component of the SDG 16. More specifically on the elimination of all forms of violence against children, which is target 16.2, and its interlinkages across the SDGs, which is over 50 SDGs targets that are interlinked to only that 16.2 target in SDG 16 plus. So we believe that together we can have a transformative impact on violence against children. In 2016, World Vision launched a global campaign as a contribution to meeting SDG target 16.2. Our campaign today has reached the most vulnerable and traditional left behind children. It has brought together children and young people across 87 countries as we thrive to build a world where no child has to live in fear of violence. Today, the campaign has impacted the lives of 268 million children. So we are seeing some positive gains towards ending violence against children. However, we still have a long way to go because violence against children increased during the COVID-19 pandemic. Even more, our annual review of the voluntary national reviews presented by the governments at HLPF over the past few years demonstrate an increased focus only on a few categories of violence, while other categories are left out of the reports, which may well mean a limited or non-existent focus by the governments. This is very critical because the SDG 16 target specifically calls for ending all forms of violence against children. So this is important to note. Another big gap that we observe is investment to end violence against children. World Vision and a group of partners have reviewed this investment, finding that only a relatively small part of overall ODA is invested on ending violence against children. And this is where the urgency of financing the SDG is a must. It's a must-have if we are to reach the targets by 2030. Children and young people participation has been central to our It Takes a World campaign to end violence against children. Over 804,000 children and young people have actively participated in the campaign and have joined together with other supporters to take over 2 million advocacy actions. So the 2030 agenda clearly affirmed children and young people as agents of change, which is why all efforts must be taken to ensure their meaningful participation by providing and facilitating spaces in an enabling environment. A couple of challenges we often observe when it comes to children participation is that children capacity to actively participate is not widely recognized. and while often children are conflated with youth. So these are two very distinct groups. And I would like to encourage you to be mindful of this distortion of rights. I would like to reaffirm before concluding World Vision commitment to supporting the 3 priorities of the SDG 16 Plus Now campaign, because they speak directly to what I have outlined. So first, it's commitments, which for us is delivering on the transformative promise of the 2030 Agenda and its SDGs regarding those people that have been traditionally left behind, particularly children and young people. Financing for SDG 16 that will enable increased funding for ending violence against children and any other aspects and issues that are underfunded. And the role of civil society for SDG 16 Plus, where children are part of as change makers because they have a clear contribution to make and have been making very decisively. Thank you so much for today, and back to you, Sherry.
Thank you so much, Aurelus, and also for World Vision's continued commitment to supporting this campaign. I'm now going to hand over to a TAP national partner. Representing CPAY today is Javier Soroski, the Director of Research at CPAY. Over to you, Javier.
Thank you very much, Sherry. As you said, my name is Javier Soroski. I'm the Director of Research of CPAY. CPAY is a think tank that works generating data and analysis to support decision makers in issues related to global development agendas, working from Latin America and the Caribbean, but with a global perspective. I would like to start today by pointing out that the SDG 16 icon, which all we know well, is a contribution to the dissemination of the SDGs, but it fails to correctly convey its essence because by simplifying its formulation and turning it into peace, justice, and strong institutions, it loses some of its core elements. In the text of the 2030 Agenda, this objective, this goal, is presented as promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. Here, peace is as important as inclusion, an absent reference in the short formulation of the goal. Moreover, here peace and inclusion are tied to triggering active efforts to promote the social conditions on which social peace is built and possible. This position articulates the effective enjoyment of all SDGs. Justice is access to justice for all in the 2030 Agenda, and it's a way of ensuring that the enjoyment of rights for all is supported by institutions without any exclusion. Strong institutions are in the 2030 Agenda effective and inclusive institutions, operating at all levels and sectors, one might infer, in an accountable and inclusive way. Thus, the commitment is to have institutions working based on efficiency as a guide for their management, participation as a form of organization, and accountability as a form of social control over institutions' actions and results. Peace, justice, and strong institution is a limited summary of the SDG 16, falling short in translating its means. So SDG 16 must be understood as a goal integrating the 2030 Agenda as a whole through the promotion of a model of governance made up of institutions and processes that promote the complete set of SDGs, reinforcing their enjoyment for all, and creating the conditions for democratic control of institutions' works by citizens. From a holistic view, the SDG 16 is linked to all other SDGs and make the principle of interdependence concrete in terms of institutional management and governance, reassures the principle of leaving no one behind, and called for interaction between levels and stakeholders in the 2030 Agenda implementation and monitoring, promoting the principles of multi-stakeholders work and universality, both established in the 2030 Agenda. In addition, it also promotes access to rights and an effective and participatory democracy. For these reasons, the campaign SDG 16 now is of critical importance in the current international framework, where the solutions of the problems we face in the form of multiple linked crises require agile and strong multi-level governance, as this objective proposes. It's a campaign that is as necessary as timely, in which, to be coherent, we must be inclusive, effective, and transparent. Each institution and each person that joins this campaign is making it stronger, and by participating, is being part of the achievement of these objectives. We need more commitment to SDG 16. We need better financing for SDG 16. And we need civil society taking the leadership in the SDG 16 achievement. CEPEI, the institution I work in, has assumed these commitments. Recently, we have developed a virtual tool that seeks to help decision makers and the multiple stakeholders interested in the SDGs to have information on the quality of the institutions leading the SDGs implementation and monitoring in Latin America and the Caribbean, and also on the quality of the voluntary national reports that they submit to the HLPF. To this end, we have created virtual tools that are freely accessible and adaptable to the needs of each user within what we have called the SDG Quality Tracker. In the case of the governance of the institutions leading the national implementation of the 2030 Agenda at the national level, we have developed a 3 Cs approach based on the essential functions that any institution leading the 2030 Agenda implementation must be prepared to fulfill. The first C is championing, leading the process and moving it forward. The second C is convening, gathering all the interested actors, their ideas and capabilities to work together. And the third C is communicating, to be transparent and support this dissemination and awareness of the SDGs. The results of the analysis made by CEPEI in 33 countries of Latin America and the Caribbean confirm some perceptions we previously had on the SDGs implementation and monitoring national governance that are now sustained in concrete data, showing us institutional strengths that must be exploited and weaknesses on which we must work. It is just one of CEPEI contributions to the quality governance for the 2030 Agenda promotion, which is added to our effort to strengthen sustainable development governance at the regional level, our commitments to the UNDS reform at the global and national levels, and our participation in processes that seek to ensure that the SDG Summit and the Summit of the Future results in an increased governance quality that will be ready to respond to the current complex challenges that stands in our way towards sustainable development. I invite you to learn about our work, and I invite you especially to join us in this campaign to put the SDG 16 in its rightful place, and to do it now. Thank you very much for giving me the space to share with you our work and considerations on this very important campaign that we are launching today.
Thank you, Javier, and thank you also for the specific examples of your work that you mentioned. I'd invite you to drop a couple of links like to your tracker and things like that in the chat for others to have a look afterwards. Moving us along, I'm going to hand over next to a TAP regional partner. So I invite Jyotsna Mohan Singh, coordinator of the Asia Development Alliance, to take the floor.
Thank you so much, Sherry. This is indeed a very, very timely campaign.
And we are very proud to be part of this campaign. Good evening. I'm Jyotsna Mohan, and I'm from India and representing Global South. Um, so SDG, why SDG 16? We have seen that, in our region, especially if you go to Asian countries, and what we have seen in the past, in past 3-4 years, the political situation, the geopolitical situation is changing so fast. We have seen the Taliban takeover in South Asia. We have seen the lots of restrictions on freedom of expression, restrictions on the journalist, on the digital media. There has been lots of restrictions. Apart from that, we have also seen the junta takeover in Myanmar. Whole South and Southeast Asia is actually going through turmoil. So looking at all that, issues, I think SDG 16 indeed plays a very important role. We saw the Mentimeter, and we saw that there are lots of challenges which was outlined by the participants here, and one of them was lack of political will. This is something which is very, very important and crucial in our state, in our region, because we see everything but the lack of political will. The government simply do not want the SDG 16 even to be mentioned. So this is something, and although the SDG 16 which talks about the promotion of peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, providing access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. These aspirations have not yet been fully realized by any society in the world. And so SDG 16 is extremely important as a fundamental goal, and its effective implementation at local, national, regional, and international levels is an essential precondition for realizing of many other agenda of 2030 goals and targets. We know that we are off the track, and we also feel that COVID was the COVID pandemic, the whole entire incidence was just an excuse. We were already tracked from the SDG, from achieving the agenda, and there has been many cases. For example, the issue of data. There are hardly 40% data available even to measure the progress. So even with this kind of data that we have in our region, it will take another 65 years and maybe in 200 years to realize the gender mainstreaming in our region. Another thing that we have seen in our region is the threats to civic space, which I mentioned before. And what we have seen that none of the VNRs so far are even talking about the issue of shrinking civic space, which is something that itself shows the issues of political will. When we talk about the institutional mechanism, we see a lot of countries in our region, especially Uzbekistan, Timor-Leste, Mongolia, Cambodia, Vietnam, they have national action plan all integrated in their plan. But what we see that there has been the issue of the said institution being very weak in playing the role, even if most of the countries were able to set up the agency supervising the implementation of SDGs in their country. And a deeper study on the effectiveness and strength of these agencies in playing the role to oversee implementation will be very, very crucial, especially when we are halfway through the SDGs implementation, and the SDGs are definitely, they are backsliding. The other issue that I wanted to talk about here is policy coherence. We see complete policy incoherence. There is no incoherence between the national, regional, and the global policies. Although we have seen that some of the countries again in our region, which shows that SDGs, they are in coherence, especially we have seen in Uzbekistan, where the policies are completely coherent with the large scale reforms that have been implemented in the framework of the strategy for action in the 5 priority areas in this country. In Mongolia, also we have seen a lot of good, policy coherence. In Maldives, we have seen that the government has a policy framework on SDGs implementation. In Cambodia, we have seen that there is an integrated SDGs approach. However, policy coherence, there are lots of other agreements that needs to be in coherence. For example, the Paris Agreement, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Management, and many such issues, and also the global aid and the development effectiveness agenda. These all needs to be integrated fully in the national framework, which is completely missing. Another thing that we are seeing, that the whole looking at the whole of civil society approach. Of course, most of the governments, they claim that there is a lots of whole of society. I mean, they are using this approach. They are talking to indigenous people, gender. They are trying to balance the gender. They are trying to bring the indigenous people, but actually, in reality, when it comes to the localizing of SDGs, it's completely missing. So, localizing, I also wanted to focus that localizing is something which is we really need to stress now, at least. We have seen some of the good example in our region. We have seen in Nepal, Malaysia, where there's some sort of localizing is being done. And then definitely, civil society as citizens report. We have seen there's lots of report that comes from the member states, but there has been completely non-acceptance when it comes to the civil society report. We could not manage to find a place on the mainstream UNDESA website. And so these are some of the gaps that we already saw was funding. So we see that unfortunately not many CSOs can plan the SDGs as there is no funding opportunity. And then the issues of the bilateral funding, most of the funding that comes from the international donors that goes directly to the government. So, and then it's up to the government how they want to spend the money. So this is something we really need to think about it, because if that money is not diverted to the civil society, we cannot even think about the localizing of SDGs. So some of the recommendations, just very quickly, I would say we really need inclusive and participatory, approach in the SDGs implementation, and the national assessment of SDGs, and the monitoring and framework. Because what we see in the VNRs, for example, that there is no monitoring framework. I mean, every year the countries that they present VNR, they go back, they forget, and again, if they're presenting for the second or third time, they start afresh. So I think there has to have some sort of monitoring review framework, which is already there in the VNR handbook, but this is something which is completely missing. So what we have done in our region, I mean, as Asia, in Asia Pacific, what we have done, that we try to do the national indicators for SDG 16. And some of those countries, they, especially the civil society, they have applied, they have, and the last thing that I wanted to say, that we are also trying to promote SDG 16 in the Civil 20 India. This is the first time actually when SDG 16 has been kind of appreciated and acknowledged. So long way to go, but thank you so much, and thank you again.
Thank you so much, Jyotsna, for highlighting some of the really important work done in your region. I'm going to hand over, since we are quickly coming to the end of our session today, to a very important SDG 16 Now champion. So I invite Annika Silver-Leander, Head of North America and Deputy Permanent Observer to the UN for International IDEA.
Hello, and thank you so much for inviting me. Lovely to be on a panel with you again, Sherry, second time in the last few weeks. We are really delighted and excited to be champions of the SDG 16 Now campaign. We think it's critical to raise awareness and spur action on the importance of accelerating progress on SDG 16 plus as an enabler of the 2030 agenda. And for those of you who don't know us, International IDEA is an intergovernmental organization, and we are dedicated to supporting democracy worldwide. And we do it through global comparative knowledge on democracy building and technical assistance and capacity building to democratic actors and institutions in newer democracies. And we have been vocal advocates for SDG 16 plus since well before the 2030 agenda was adopted. We also played a vocal role in advocating for SDG 16 plus during the SDG 16 negotiation. And for us, this is about recognizing the role that democratic processes, principles, institutions, and stakeholders play as enablers and accelerators for the entire 2030 agenda. And since the 2030 agenda was adopted, we have played a role in tracking progress on SDG 16 plus through the production of complementary data, through our global state of democracy indices that we contribute through our involvement in the SDG 16 data initiative that the TAP network is part of, in addition to 16 other organizations, all from civil society. And as part of this initiative, we produce a report that tracks progress every year since 2017 on the progress on SDG 16. And I just want to highlight 3 quick reasons why IDEA supports this campaign as an intergovernmental organization, champion of the campaign. And the first one is that SDG 16 Plus recognizes that peace, justice, inclusion, and accountable institutions are central to achieve the entire 2030 agenda. And the evidence is very clear. None of the other goals in the 2030 agenda are going to be achieved without progress on SDG 16 and SDG 16 Plus. I'm not going to outline all the reason and the data. We don't have time for that. But we are happy to make this data available in addition to all the other data sources out there that provide backing to this. In order to make the case for SDG 16 as an enabler, we need evidence and data to back it up, and we have it collectively, all of us, and IDEA is contributing to that. Second, through our intergovernmental status, we have access to member states that are committed to SDG 16 and SDG 16 Plus. And there are more than you think. And we can help reach out to them, act as a bridge between civil society and governments. We can help strengthen multi-stakeholder alliances and identify government champions committed to SDG 16 Plus. We also have observer status at the UN, where we act as an advocate on democracy and on SDG 16, and where we can help advance this agenda in spaces where civil society may not be invited. And we comment on drafts of the political declaration. We encourage governments to make ambitious commitments for the SDG summits. So we want you to know that we are advocates for all those voices out there that care about and advocate for SDG 16. Finally, we are an ally to civil society, and we want you to see it that way. And we work very closely with civil society in everything that we do, whether it's through the SDG 16 Data Initiative or the Global Democracy Coalition or other coalitions and networks that we are part of. And we can help amplify your voices, provide enabling platforms, and help convene stakeholders from different sectors in new alliances. And we can also facilitate access to information and data. I'll share in the chat some tools that we developed for the Summit for Democracy last year, where we have a dashboard on tracking commitments. We're happy to share that. I think that can be useful also for this initiative and for the campaign, and a number of other initiatives around similar commitments. So thanks for including us as champions to this very valuable SDG 16 Plus campaign. We're delighted to be champions of this and count on us as allies in this process.
Thank you so much, Annika, and thank you also for putting those resources in the chat. Like, data was something that came out really strongly in engagement with members, but also in the Mentimeter we just had earlier. So there's a clear need for data-backed approaches to advocacy. This was really wonderful hearing from all of the different stakeholders in the campaign. I'd love to now hand over to the TAP Secretariat, first with Ellery, to tell us what's next.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you so much for joining. And it's just wonderful to see all the engagement and excitement for this campaign in the chat. And I just encourage you to take that excitement and interest in all those questions and channel it into a couple things I'll highlight right now. So number one is just making sure that we have all the people who should be involved in this campaign already engaged. So if you're a part of the TAP network, make sure you're filling out that campaign's activities interest form so that we can follow up as we start to initiate those activities and get the right people on board at the very beginning. Also, if you're a part of TAP network, or if you'd like to apply, you can also take your inputs and participation and questions and channel that through our advocacy and campaigns working group, where we can kind of dissect what's going on in the campaign and make strategic decisions based on your input. So that's a great way to get more deeply involved in this campaign. If you're not already part of TAP Network, please make sure, if you're interested in this campaign, to fill out the campaign community form, where you'll automatically become part of that campaign. And then finally, I think we just need to amplify the message that we are here and we are getting started right now. So I've left a couple options in the chat about how you can do that. You can tweet out using the click to tweet I provided. You can also check out our promotional package. I've only gotten started on all the things that I'd like to create, but you'll see some there. Like I'm going into dissecting what our key messages are. So hashtag for financing for SDG 16 now, hashtag for campaign commitments, and hashtag for civil society. So you can check out all of that at the promotional package. And finally, make sure that you're following TAP Network and you're staying up to date on all of the campaign developments through our Twitter channel. We're also on Facebook and LinkedIn. So thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited to see everyone excited about this campaign. Thank you to our speakers for coming today. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this year.
Thanks, Ellery. I just want to say to people who had their hand raised or were hoping to pose questions, we had a jam-packed schedule today and it was really hard to get to those questions. So we do apologize for that. And I'll hand over to John Romano to wrap this up.
Great. Yep. Thanks, Sherry. And thanks again to all of you for joining. Again, as has been said, this really is just the beginning. So I think, again, as Ellery mentioned, I think it's great to see the interest and excitement. And I think we can hopefully convert that into mobilization and advocacy and connections as we outlined the core objectives of this campaign. So with all that said, thanks again for joining us. We really look forward to taking this forward with all of you. Again, whether you're civil society or government or other champions in this space. I think there's a quick road ahead of us, but also a long one heading into the SDG Summit in September. That's our first milestone to get to. So we have a busy 4 months ahead of us to the summit, but obviously looking forward to hopefully having this build momentum and that we can sustain this in the long term as well. So again, this is just the beginning. Really looking forward to engaging with all of you, and we'll be in touch and follow up from this. We'll share all the links that all of the participants shared as well. So we'll be in touch from all this. And again, thanks again for your engagement and in advance for your continued mobilization engagement. So thanks everyone. And thanks also Sherry for chairing us. So.
Pleasure. Thank you, Secretariat, for putting all of this together. Thanks, everyone.